There is a man you probably know. Maybe you are him. He reads about investing. He watches videos about building wealth. He understands intellectually that money sitting in a savings account is slowly being eaten alive by inflation. He knows this. He has known this for years, and yet every time he gets close to making a move, buying an asset, starting something, putting capital somewhere, it might actually grow, something stops him. A cold feeling in the chest, a voice that says, "What if it goes wrong?" And so he waits. He tells himself he's being responsible. He tells himself he'll move when the time is right, when he has more information, when the market stabilizes, when things feel safer. The time never comes. And here is the truth that no financial influencer will say out loud because it doesn't sell courses and it doesn't feel good to hear. That man is not playing it safe. He is choosing a slower, quieter, more socially acceptable version of financial destruction. The risk-averse man does not escape risk. He simply hands the controls to someone else and hopes they're kind. Machiavelli understood this with a coldness that most modern men are not prepared for. He watched governments, families, entire dynasties collapse, not because they were reckless, but because they were too careful at the wrong moment. He wrote that fortune is like a river that floods when left unchecked. You do not stop the flood by standing on the bank hoping it changes direction. You build channels before the rain comes. You redirect it. You use it. This video is not about becoming reckless. It is not going to tell you to quit your job tomorrow, put everything into cryptocurrency, or bet your savings on a business idea you haven't tested. That is not what Machiavelli taught. What he taught, and what the wealthiest, most strategically intelligent men in history have always known, is that risk is not the enemy. Misdirected risk is the enemy. Unexamined fear is the enemy. And the belief that safety is a destination rather than an illusion is the most expensive lie most men will ever believe. These are 6 laws for the man who wants wealth but has been paralyzed by the fear of losing what little he has, not to make him reckless, to make him precise. In the 15th century, Florence was the financial capital of the world, and the family that controlled it, the Medici, did not build their empire by avoiding risk. They built it by becoming the most sophisticated managers of risk that Renaissance Europe had ever seen. Cosimo de' Medici, the man who turned a regional banking family into a continent-spanning dynasty, operated in one of the most volatile political and financial environments imaginable. Popes borrowed from him. Kings owed him money. Rivals wanted him exiled or dead. And at various points, he faced all 3 simultaneously. What Cosimo did, and this is the part that gets left out of the history books, was engineer his exposure. He didn't eliminate risk. He decided, deliberately and systematically, which risks would land on him and which would land on someone else. He spread his banking operations across cities so no single political collapse could destroy everything. He lent to powerful men in ways that made those men dependent on his continued success. He made his own survival in someone else's interest. He was not fearless. He was strategic about fear. That is the distinction this entire video is built on. Not the absence of fear, the architecture of it. Law 1, the risk illusion. Here is what no one told you about the safe path. It does not exist. When you leave your money in a savings account earning 2% interest while inflation runs at 6%, you are not being cautious. You are losing 4% of your purchasing power every single year, silently, without drama, without a moment that feels like a mistake. There is no notification. There is no loss event. There is just the slow, invisible shrinking of what your money can actually buy. When you stay in a job you hate because it feels secure, you are not avoiding risk. You are accepting one specific risk. The risk of being laid off, restructured, replaced, or made obsolete by someone younger who will do your job for less, in exchange for the illusion of control. The company does not guarantee your security. It offers you the feeling of security, which is a different product entirely. Machiavelli wrote that men deceive themselves when they believe they can choose between a safe course and a dangerous one. In reality, he said, most of the time you are choosing between one form of danger and another. The only question is whether you are choosing consciously or letting someone else choose for you. This is where most risk-averse men lose the game before it even starts. they believe they are making a conservative choice. What they are actually doing is outsourcing their risk to an employer, a government, an economic system, or a bank, and then hoping that whichever institution they've trusted will be more careful with their future than they would have been themselves. The first law is simply this: stop calling it safety. Call it what it is: delegated risk. Someone else is carrying your financial exposure for you. The question is not whether you want to take on risk. You already have. The question is whether you want to be the one deciding what kind. Law 2. The calculated exposure. Once you understand that risk cannot be eliminated, only directed, the next question becomes, how do you direct it? Machiavelli's answer was not intuition. It was not bravery in the Hollywood sense, the leap of faith, the burning of ships, the all-in moment. His answer was timing and positioning. He believed that the man who enters a dangerous situation on his own terms, before circumstances force him in, is fundamentally in a different position than the man who waits until the crisis arrives and then reacts. He wrote about this in terms of political power, but the principle translates with uncomfortable precision to money. The prince who waits until his enemies are already at the gate has already lost half the battle. The prince who moves first, deliberately, into a difficult space, before the pressure becomes unbearable, controls the frame of engagement. In financial terms, this looks like this: the man who begins investing in a volatile asset during a period of low excitement, low media coverage, low public interest. That man is making a calculated exposure. He is choosing to enter discomfort on his schedule. He sets the terms. He decides his position size. He knows what a 50% drop looks like before it happens, and he's already decided how he'll respond. Contrast that with the man who waits until the asset is on every news channel, until his friends are talking about it, until it feels safe, and then enters at peak price, with peak emotion, with no framework for what happens when it inevitably corrects. That man did not avoid risk. He walked into maximum risk while it was wearing the costume of safety. Calculated exposure means you go looking for controlled discomfort before uncontrolled discomfort comes looking for you. You start the business when you still have income, not when you've been fired. You invest before you feel ready, not when the moment feels obvious. You have the difficult conversation before the resentment becomes a wall. The man who moves early into discomfort on his own terms is operating from strength. The man who waits for certainty is operating on borrowed time. Law 3. The asymmetry rule. Not all risks are equal. This sounds obvious. It is not practiced. Most people think of risk as a binary. Either I take the risk or I don't. Machiavelli, and every genuinely wealthy man who has ever existed, thought about risk in terms of structure. What is the maximum I can lose? What is the realistic upside if I'm right? And critically, is the downside survivable? This is the asymmetry rule. You only make moves where the downside is something you can recover from and the upside is disproportionately larger. You never make moves where a bad outcome destroys you and a good outcome merely improves things slightly. A practical example. Spending 3 months learning a high-income skill in your spare time costs you time, some money for courses, and your evenings for a season. If it doesn't work out, you've lost those 3 months. If it does work out, it could restructure your entire earning capacity for the next decade. That is an asymmetric bet. The downside is bounded. The upside is open-ended. Compare that to borrowing money you cannot afford to lose, putting it into a single speculative asset because someone on the internet said it would triple, and attaching your emotional state to the daily price movement. That is symmetric at best. You might double it, you might lose it all, and catastrophic at worst, because now you're also carrying debt and psychological damage. Machiavelli wrote that a wise man does not expose himself to danger unless he is compelled to, but when compelled, he is pleased to choose the danger best suited to him. The asymmetry rule is about choosing your danger, not avoiding it. Choosing the version where, if you're wrong, you stand back up, and if you're right, the gain changes the trajectory. The risk-averse man fails here not because he avoids all asymmetric bets. He fails because he's never been taught to distinguish between a bet where the downside is manageable and a bet where the downside is ruin. To him, all risk looks the same, terrifying. Learning to see the structure underneath the fear is the skill. Law 4. The fear audit. Here is something almost no one does, and almost everyone should. Sit with your risk aversion for long enough to ask it a question. Where did you come from? Most of the financial fear that stops men from building wealth is not rational. It is not the result of a careful analysis of market conditions or personal cash flow. It is emotional memory. It is the residue of watching a parent lose money, of being told as a child that rich people are corrupt, or that wanting more is greedy, or that security means having a steady paycheck. It is the internalized voice of an environment that associated financial risk with catastrophe because, for the people around you, it sometimes was. That fear is real. It was formed in real circumstances, but it is being applied indiscriminately to situations that bear no resemblance to the original danger. Machiavelli had no patience for men who let old wounds make current decisions. He wrote about the importance of judging things as they are, not as you fear they might become. He watched rulers destroy their own kingdoms by acting on imagined threats while ignoring actual ones, paralyzed by the ghost of a danger that no longer existed in its original form. The fear audit is simple in concept, genuinely difficult in practice. You take a specific financial move you've been avoiding, investing a fixed amount monthly, starting something on the side, having a difficult money conversation, and you ask, what exactly am I afraid will happen? You write it down. You make it specific, not, it might go wrong, but I'm afraid I'll lose $600 and feel like an idiot. Then you ask, is this fear based on evidence from my current situation, or is it a pattern I inherited? Most men, when they do this honestly, find that the fear governing their financial life was installed before they were 20 years old. It was formed in a household, a school, a relationship, and it has been running quietly in the background ever since, vetoing decisions on behalf of a version of you that no longer exists. You cannot audit a fear you've never named. Once you name it, it becomes a piece of information rather than a wall. Law 5. The slow burn trap. This is the law that most risk-averse men will resist most strongly because it attacks the belief they've organized their entire life around. The man who avoids risk does not avoid catastrophe. He postpones it while paying compound interest on the delay. Think about what the slow burn actually looks like in practice. You are 30 years old. You have a job that feels stable. You have some savings. You are not investing aggressively because the market feels uncertain and you don't fully understand it, and the last thing you want is to lose what you've worked for. So you wait. You plan to start properly at 35 once you understand things better. At 35, you have more responsibilities. A family, perhaps. Rent that's higher. The stakes feel bigger, so the risk feels even less acceptable. You plan to start at 40 when things settle. At 40, you are running out of time for compound interest to do its work. The decisions you should have made at 30 now need to be made urgently, under pressure, with higher stakes and less time for recovery. The conservative position you held for a decade didn't protect you. It just made the eventual forced move more dangerous. Machiavelli called this kind of delay the failure of men who seek to avoid present danger by feeding it. You give the problem a decade of your earning years to grow larger while you convince yourself you're being responsible. The slow burn trap is specifically cruel to intelligent, thoughtful men because they can always construct a rational-sounding reason to wait. There's always another quarter to observe, another piece of information to gather, another variable to account for. Machiavelli wrote that he who hesitates gives fortune the opportunity to do with him what she pleases. Fortune does not wait for you to feel ready. She moves on her own schedule. The man in the slow burn trap is not being careful. He is feeding the very risk he's afraid of, 1 year at a time, while it grows teeth. Law 6. The positioning move. Everything in this video has been building to this. If you cannot tolerate high-stakes gambling with your capital, and most people shouldn't, then the answer is not to sit still. The answer is to shift your focus from outcomes to positioning. Machiavelli's most enduring insight was not about how to take power. It was about how to be in the right position when power becomes available. He watched men with inferior resources defeat men with superior ones over and over, because the inferior man had spent years building his position, while the superior man had spent years assuming his position was secure. In financial terms, positioning means this: instead of putting all your energy into picking the right asset, or timing the market, or finding the perfect business idea, you focus on what you can actually control: your skills, your relationships, your knowledge base, your income sources, your expenses, your reputation in a field. A man who has spent 2 years developing a skill that the market pays well for has positioned himself for multiple future opportunities he cannot yet see. He doesn't know exactly which opportunity will materialize. He doesn't need to. He has made himself the kind of person that opportunities are attracted to. This is not a soft concept. It is a strategic one. Cosimo de' Medici did not become the most powerful banker in Europe by making one brilliant bet. He did it by becoming indispensable to so many different powerful people that his own survival became structurally embedded in the system. His position was so well engineered that attacking him meant damaging people who relied on him. You build that kind of position not through a single high-risk move, but through the accumulation of asymmetric bets, small, survivable, skill-building, relationship-building investments of your time and attention over years. The risk is distributed, the exposure is controlled, and the compound effect of all those small, intelligent positioning moves eventually produces something that looks, from the outside, like someone got very lucky. They didn't get lucky. They got positioned. The man who says he cannot tolerate risk usually means he cannot tolerate the idea of a single catastrophic loss. That is a reasonable position. The answer is not to abandon ambition. The answer is to stop thinking in single large bets and start thinking in years of deliberate positioning. Low-cost, high-learning, asymmetric moves that build on each other until the question is no longer whether you'll build wealth, but which form it arrives in. You came into this video afraid of the wrong thing. The danger was never in the market. It was never in the investment, the business, the asset. The danger was in the story you were told, that careful men finish well, that patience means waiting, that stability is something institutions give you rather than something you build yourself. Machiavelli lived in a world where everything could be taken from a man in a single afternoon: his fortune, his position, his name. And the men who survived that world, who built things that lasted across generations, were not the reckless ones. They were the ones who understood the terrain, who mapped their fear, who moved early, moved deliberately, and never confused motion with recklessness or stillness with wisdom. Most men spend their whole lives avoiding danger. You just learned how to aim it.